Hello again. My name is Quentin Rock. I'm an application engineer with GoEngineer, and today's topic will be uncovering the hidden secrets of the SolidNetWork License Manager. All right, looking at today's agenda, we'll be covering just the basics of the SolidNetWork License Manager, what it is, how do you get it, what are some of the ins and outs of using it, and some of the features that maybe you didn't realize were there and how they work as well. Just a kind of brief slide here of what is the SolidNetWork License Manager, SNL. That's what we abbreviate. It doesn't stand for Saturday Night Live in the SolidWorks world, at least. SolidNetWork License Manager is basically, there's two types of licenses. There's what we call standalone and network licenses. So with the network license, that's a floating based on concurrent logins. So for example, if you have 5 licenses on the network, you can install it on as many machines as you want, but only 5 are concurrently going to be able to pull licenses and use the software. And that's what this tool does. And for the most part, people don't really think about this tool much at all. Once it's installed and activated and distributing licenses, you really shouldn't have to do much. It's also interesting or important to mention that it's based on this FlexNet publisher or FlexLM type software. The SolidNetWork License Manager is basically an interface to the FlexLM backbone of what the license manager distribution is. So if you've ever used other tools, they may have different types of license managers, but it's very common that it's all based on the FlexLM or the FlexNet licensing system. Where do you get it? So it's part of the installation manager of SolidWorks. There's a server side and a client side. Clients, you really don't have to think about much because as soon as you type in a network serial number, SolidWorks Installation Manager recognizes that's a network and it'll install the license manager for you. And it'll even prompt you towards the end of the install to enter in the license manager information to connect to it. So that's that 25734 at whatever the name of your license server is. There are some ports and things to open up there, 25734 being the default. Now you can adjust those numbers. I always tell people if there's no need to, don't, because that's the default, everybody knows it. But if for some reason there's a conflict there, you can change the port numbers. And basically the license manager sits there and just runs and distributes licenses. So generally you can put it on pretty much any compatible server, operating system. It doesn't really use a lot of horsepower or anything on the server, so you're not going to run out of resources by running the license manager itself. And that just distributes the licenses. You have to be able to connect and stay connected to the license manager, though, as a client. If you disconnect from the license manager, at some point in time, probably within 15 minutes, I would say, you're going to get a message saying that you're no longer can get the license, and you'll end up, all it'll let you do is save and close SolidWorks or close the application that you have the license for. So let's go through some of the user interface. You can see 5 tabs just in the screenshot here, but only 4 tabs are on the client. So that first tab called Server Administration, you'll only see on the server side of the application, not on the client side, unless you somehow installed the wrong thing on your client. But so the rest of the tabs will go through as well, and I'll kind of jump back and forth between them, but let's go in and take a look at our license manager. So I have a shortcut to it, but it is in the SolidWorks tools. So when you scroll down to the SolidWorks tools section, you'll see that, like, for example, there'll be a client. It's a little cut off, but if I hover over it, you can see the SolidNetWork License Manager client. And then you'll also see, the one that says server. So depending on, obviously, on the server, you're probably not going to install clients on the server. So you might just only have one and it'll say server next to it. But they do identify which one's the server and which one's the client if you happen to be running both on the same system. So when I launch it up, now this has already been pre-installed and it's already been activated. On the server administration tab, this is where you kind of deal with, the server level stuff. So I can click modify here if I wanted to activate a new license. So for example, if I buy some additional products and I get a new serial number, I can go modify the installation. So I go to the programs and features and click change and then, add the serial number in. There's a way to do it in the registry without modifying it, but it's pretty simple to do it as part of the install. And then I would launch it up and activate that software, or that, at least that serial number. If and that's already been done, so I can kind of show the activated products. But it's basically a wizard that I'd click through and go through, and we'll come back to this because I want to talk about the options file in a bit. But this is where I was talking about if you needed to change ports and things like that. That's probably the biggest thing that you'll do on this section once it's up and running, is just if you need to add more licenses or reread them, or if you're moving to another server, you can transfer the activations back and then go to another server and reactivate them. Some of the lesser known things, if for some reason you end up getting like a text file or a temporary file, sometimes we do that if there's been some issues with, like, the activation system is down or something and we just need to get you something to use temporarily. We may end up having to switch to using a license file or something, but our tech support team or whoever will walk you through that. So I won't cover that too much, but that's one of the big things there. So looking at the license usage. So this tab, let's do this. Let me just get out of the PowerPoint for a second here. So this license usage tab, this is where you'll see what's in use. So my computer is obviously called QRock-lap, and the different licenses and the products you have. Now, I am using, I'm a reseller, so I have a lot of different licenses and different things in here. Obviously, your list might be a lot smaller depending on which products you buy. But for example, if I switch over to SolidWorks Standard and I launch SolidWorks, and this is the 2021 license manager, even though I just launched 2020 SolidWorks. And that's kind of an important thing to point out, is that you can run older versions of the software with a newer license manager, but not the reverse. So if you're running a 2019 license manager, it's not going to distribute 2020 or 2021 licenses. But if you're running a 2021 license manager, that can distribute older license types. So we'll take a look here. So now that SolidWorks is up, when I come over here and refresh, I can see that I've pulled a license of the SolidWorks Standard. Now, by default, typically it likes to pull the lowest level of licenses, but if I also look, I might have also pulled the SolidWorks Premium license. And the reason for that is I probably had some add-ins turned on that required, so probably the toolbox and some of these other add-ins may have pulled the higher level license as well. It's kind of misleading when you look at your license counts that I have one license of SolidWorks. Yes, I have a one-seat network for tech support and other things I do, but you might obviously have more licenses. But you always need a SolidWorks Standard license when you launch SolidWorks. You don't always need a SolidWorks Premium or Professional or one of the higher packages licenses. So when you actually get a SolidWorks Premium license, you're actually getting Standard and Premium together, and they need to be together. It's not two different sessions that you can run separately. The reason for that is, maybe you have 5 users, so you buy 5, SolidWorks, or you buy 4 SolidWorks Standards and 1 Premium, and then you can float just that Premium across those 5 users, and that way you have kind of separate. You'll see when you actually get to license borrowing that it hopefully makes more sense. But if I want to return the license, I can close SolidWorks, and within a few seconds or so, we'll start seeing the license get freed back up. If you do float certain things, like let's say flow simulation, I float that around, and I can always go in here and see this. And this, again, this tab right here is available for clients, so you can get through to it through the start menu or through the help pull down menu inside of SolidWorks. Launch the SolidNetWork License Manager to see who's using a license if you're not able to obtain one. Server list, this is where you add the servers, the names of the server. So in this case, I only have one to add, but you could add multiple license servers. On a technical level, you can add multiple license servers as long as you can speak to them through that port or ports. Once a license server has been moved to a new machine, remove the old license server from this list, because it does try and go through and look at all the licenses for that. And if it's the first one on the list, you're actually going to see a little bit of a delay when it tries to pull a license, because it's going to go to the old one that doesn't exist anymore, realize it doesn't exist, and then go to the next one on the list and then see that there is licenses. So removing old licenses, it's probably not taking up that much time, but you'll notice it goes a little faster to launch SolidWorks and pull the license when it gets to that section. And there's really not much more to it. You click add, you type it in. They even give you the 25734 example right there. And you can add it. So 25734, let's just say add server 1, which I know is not legit. And I click OK. It's going to try and check that. You can see this is what I'm talking about. If you were to launch SolidWorks and it's trying to pull a license, it's going to do that pause there, check that server, and wait an extra few seconds before it finds out that server doesn't exist and go to the next one on the list. So by removing old ones from the list, you can avoid a few seconds during launch there. It would still let me add this server, but obviously I know that that's not an accurate server. If you're unable to connect to your server and you've got the server name right, you can always ping it, make sure that you're able to communicate with the server, although ping is something that can be disabled. And then it's probably like a port or a firewall issue, or some type of other networking issue. Let's get into our next section here in license borrowing. So that's the next tab over there. And that is where you can actually reserve or borrow a license of whatever you have available. And that license is now locked to you. Whether you're using SolidWorks or not, that license is in use, essentially. It's taken out of the pool. So if I have 10 licenses and I come in the morning and I borrow one of them, I'm down 9 licenses. Now I have that license, I can use it on my machine, but if I close SolidWorks, I still am holding on to that license when I borrow it. It never goes away. So the idea is, it's more for travel situations, where, I know I'm going to be traveling. I don't know what the situation is going to be like, how often I can VPN in and all that. So I'm just going to pull the license to make sure I have it. Or some people will use it for like the weekend. We'll pull it, the license, and have it expire on Sunday. And, that way it's ready for Monday morning. And you can also return the license. A license can be borrowed for up to 30 days also. And if you need to restrict license borrowing and stuff, that's actually when we get to the options file section in a few more minutes, there is ways to do that. You can actually use an options file to restrict, maybe only let 3 of your 10 licenses be able to be borrowed, or don't let anybody borrow at all. So let's look at that. So that's the license borrow tab. So again, any of the available products that you have on your list, so you can always go back to license usage and see how many licenses of each you have, you're allowed to borrow for that time. This is out of the box. Again, like I mentioned, we can restrict this on a technical level if we need to, or, just as a company policy, you might tell people not to do this. But, keep in mind, if I was to borrow flow simulation, that's not really going to do me any good if I don't also have a SolidWorks license for it, because obviously I need to be able to launch SolidWorks and do it. Same when it comes to like SolidWorks Premium. If I borrow this, I'm also going to need to make sure I borrow the standard. So it'll automatically do that. Watch when I borrow the Premium license, it borrows the standard for me, because it realizes that I need that to run the Premium. It doesn't do that with Flow. I don't know exactly why, but my guess is that you don't always need maybe you have a standalone SolidWorks with a floating Flow license. So you have some flexibility there. So to return them, you just come in and return them. You select them, hit return. Again, let's borrow. We'll borrow the Premium again. And again, I can adjust this up to 30 days if it looks like I can do further, but when I click to borrow, it's going to warn me that, hey, you can only borrow up to 30 days. And it does expire at midnight on the day that you pick. So in this case, let's go back and we'll just borrow it for 1 day, let's say here. And I click SolidWorks Premium, and I click borrow. And it borrows both those licenses, and they'll be returned after that time. So if I was to look at the license usage, I might see that those are now being borrowed, even though I'm not running SolidWorks anymore. It's not launched up. I closed it. So now when I launch SolidWorks, it'll use that borrowed license, but keep in mind, I'm using that license whether I like it or not. It's out of my pool of licenses now. If for some reason, like I mentioned, if you need to return these, you can very quickly select them, box select them, shift select them, whatever, hit return, and now they're back in the pool. And when I come back over here and go to SolidWorks Standard and refresh, you could already see it updated, but those are missing. So that's license borrow, pretty simple. Again, if you have problems with it, you can certainly restrict who can borrow or how many of your licenses can be borrowed. Next tab over is called license order. So basically this just prioritizes what licenses. So by default, SolidWorks is pretty good about always trying to pull the lowest level license first and then upgrading to the higher one as you need that functionality. Where this also comes into play is things like simulation. Remember that our simulation packages we have, the SolidWorks Premium comes with some simulation to it, right? It comes with static analysis of parts and assemblies in the SolidWorks Premium package. But as you get into simulation standard and simulation professional and simulation premium, you have more studies and more capabilities. So you may want to reserve or put the order of when the premium or the simulation premium should be pulled. So on the license order tab, if I look at it, I can come in here and, I can say like, this is the order that it's going to pull licenses from top to bottom, basically. So when I launch SolidWorks, it'll try and pull premium first before it pulls, anything else. And again, I only have the one license, so that's why it's kind of doesn't matter which add-ins I turn on. But simulation's a big one. Maybe I want to pull the standard first, and then if I start getting into some of the higher level packages, as I enable those types of studies and things, I might need to pull those. So you can play with this order so that, if you're running into problems where people are pulling like the highest level license and not using it first, you can change the order here and it's just move up or move down. And again, it starts from the top and works its way down. So now I want to talk about something that's a little bit, let's go back to our slides here, a little bit more of a hidden secret, I would say, is what we call our options file. So options file is really just a text file with some syntax in there, basically that allows you to toggle certain things in the license manager and how it distributes and functions. There's another blog post on the options file. The default options location, I put the path in there, but you can actually go into the modify and you can see that path as well. What kind of things can be controlled? There's so many, but some of the most commons are timeout. When does the license time out? Like I mentioned earlier, borrowing. If you have 10 licenses, you may not want more than 2 or 3 or whatever to be borrowed at any given time, or you may just want certain users not to be able to borrow and licenses, so you can restrict that kind of stuff. We call reserving. Reserving is where, like, if I had only a couple license of simulation and I wanted to reserve those for the groups of the FEA guys and not let other people use that, I could actually reserve those licenses so no one that's not supposed to be using that can pull those. A big good resource is our knowledge base. If you're in the SolidWorks knowledge base, you can type in questions like, how do I adjust the timeout, or how do I adjust this, options file? If you put the word options file in there, you'll get a lot of examples and stuff. You need to know some of the way the product names are. So I put a little a knowledge base number there, that S-068783. That gives you a list of the names. There's a FlexLM guide. So this is on our SolidWorks webpage, but it's actually the guide. Let's take a look at that. I think I brought that up here. In the administration guides section of the SolidWorks website, you can scroll down. There's actually this FlexLM users guide, and this will give you, I forget what page it's on, but I can do Control F and search for options. There it is. And it'll kind of give you some ideas of what it is. We can do most everything that you can do with FlexLM with an options file. There are certain things like that timeout, or the borrow is hard coded to 30 days. You can't change that unless you get a new license file or something, and our tech support can help with that. But this gives you an option. You can see kind of a lot of the syntax here that you can use. So if you're looking at, again, not going to go through each one of these, but this is the kind of stuff. So for a specific example that I want to use just to kind of show in this webcast is I want to reserve a license for my user, and I also want to adjust the timeout so that by default, SolidWorks times out, I believe it's at 2 hours. Most of our software does at 2 hours. But it's kind of, misleading because that's, if you're still moving your mouse or clicking on the window or something, especially with something like PDM that's tied into Windows Explorer, you're probably never going to time out until you really walk away from your computer and let it time out. So what we do is a lot of times is people request that we adjust that timeout lower so that it'll time out after an hour or something rather than having to wait 2 hours. So those are some of the things, but that's what I'm going to do kind of for my case study here. First things first is you got to go in, you got to create a text file with this stuff and put it in the right directory. If you forget, I always just go into the modify, hit activate, reactivate, and then it tells me this directory, and I can even browse to it as well if I need to. So let's open up that path now, and I have just a shortcut to it, but you can see this is the default path. And basically you're just going to put a file in there with an extension of .opt. So what we need to do is create a new text file. Because it's in program files, I always forget this. You may have some trouble actually starting the file or saving into this directory. You may have to put it like onto your desktop and then copy and paste it in. So in this case, I'm going to cancel that. So I'll just create a new text file here, and it's going to be, and this, the name of it has to match all the other names of the files. So it's SW_D, and then the extension is OPT. So you got to remove the TXT or whatever you use there. And of course, Windows will warn me, are you sure you want to name that? And yes, looks like I already have one on my desktop, but so let's do this. Let's just rename that. So first things first, add the timeout in there. So there's two different ways to do the timeouts. Let me get some syntax here and I'll paste it in from my other document. But basically this is, the first line is saying timeout the feature called SolidWorks and for 3600. So it's the timeout command, then it's the feature I want to time out, and then it's how many seconds I want before it times out. And it has to be in seconds. So, this is basically saying I'm putting a command in that says timeout everything at an hour, or timeout SolidWorks at an hour. So any SolidWorks standard, not premium or any of those will time out now at an hour. The other line here is timeout all. And that's just saying every single license that this thing distributes. And that's probably the more common thing. Once we decide on a timeout, we don't care what product it is. We want all of them to time out at the same time. So I can, by the way, you can also, if you want to comment things, you can put a hashtag or a pound sign first, and that'll comment it out. It won't count that. So, there's the timeout. I'll save this file. And then I need to make sure it's in that directory where I was talking about. So, I'll cut or copy and paste it, put it back in here. And, again, depending on your Windows permissions, it may warn you. And now I have this options file in there. To get the tool to use it, again, first I would have to check this box during the install that says I'm using an options file. So I check this box and then I make sure it's in the right location. You can actually browse and even edit it from here too, but I typically just do that outside. Once that's enabled to use the options file, and I've created an options file, I just have to stop the service and start it after I make changes to the options file. All right, so we'll start it up. And you can also look in the log and actually see, I know there's a lot of kind of gibberish stuff in the log there, but you can actually see that it's using this options file. You'll probably see a line item like that. If for some reason, you named it wrong or whatever, you'd get a message that it can't open the options file. You could see this is what we're talking about, the names of the products that I have. So these names, you notice it's not, for the PDM cat editor is kind of an odd name you wouldn't have guessed on your own. So like these are the names of the features. If you're going to restrict certain features, you need a list. This isn't the best way to get the names, but it is one way. I mean, like I mentioned, the knowledge base has plenty of articles on this. We have blog posts, and of course, tech support can help you if you're trying to figure out a name of one of the products. But you can see now, this feature has been enabled. Inactivity timeout set to 900 seconds, so 15 minutes basically. So that's what the options file does. So now let's adjust that options file again. So now because it's in here, it's going to give me that same issue of trying to edit it as it's read only. So I basically, I kind of need to run Notepad as a administrator. And this way, you know, now that I have admin permissions, I can edit it right inside of here. So now I could go File, Open, and browse to that directory. Make sure you set it, ignore PDM, make sure you set it to all files so that you can see it because it's not just a common extension. And then you're back in there. So now what I want to do is reserve SolidWorks license for a specific user. So there's kind of, again, several ways to do this. One way is, and I only have one SolidWorks license, so you know I'm basically getting rid of it. But one way is to use this reserve command, and then you specify the number of licenses with a space, and then the product. So in this case, I'm saying SolidWorks Office Premium, or SolidWorks Premium. Basically, the Office is an old name. Then I'm specifying its user and the name of the user. You know, the names of the users you can get from this column here. You can also do it by host, where you might do it by computer names instead of usernames. You can even do it by like IP addresses. So if you have like a group, one office, you know, so let's say you have two offices in different cities or something, and this office is supposed to use these licenses, this other office is supposed to use these or something, you can kind of reserve, or you have 10 licenses, you want to reserve 3 for one office and you know, 7 for the other office because there's more people there or something. So that's kind of, you can really get into different ways of categorizing it. But the one thing that I've noticed is, you know, this works pretty well, but let's say you have a lot of users and you don't want to have to go in and add more people each time or add number of licenses or something. What you can do instead is reserve it for a group. So first things first is you have to create the group. So I'm going to just put another line in here that says I'm going to create a group called GoE for GoEngineer, and that's going to have this user called QRock in there. So now I've created a group. Now instead of reserving the one license for one person, I can reserve it for the entire group. So let's reserve SolidWorks for group, and that's going to be GoE, like that. Now, what I've run into time and time again is the usernames have to, this is case sensitive. So if I just save this, what you'll see is it's probably going to fail in there. So it's going to reserve the license, but it's not going to recognize this me as the person there. So we'll stop and start the service. And you can always view the log. And it's stopping and starting the service in the middle of the day is probably okay. It's a lot faster, a lot longer interval that clients are going to check before it runs out. But let's see. So I got the inactivity. I also have it reserving the one license of SolidWorks. So it seems like it's working. It's reserving it for the group there. Again, I know the log file isn't a little bit gibberish there, but it seems like that's working. So now I should be able to launch SolidWorks and pull a license. And it says there isn't any. Now I know I have one license and I even reserved it for my user. So something's not right there, right? So what it is basically the case sensitivity. For some reason, I can never get it right, and it always changes on me. So one line that I generally recommend is adding in like this line here, group case insensitive on. That's basically saying that it doesn't matter if the Q is capitalized or any of that kind of stuff. It's just going to go ahead and say, you know, it's the characters. It's not case sensitive. So by default, it is case sensitive. You need to say insensitive and turn that on, that feature on. So now if I did this right, should be able to save that. And I have to stop and start the service again. You know, every time I make a change to that options file, I want to make sure I stop and start the service. And now when I go to launch SolidWorks, if I did this right, hopefully it won't give me a message of, yeah, it looks like we're already past where I got the message the last time, I think. You can already see it pulling that. You can see, the case sensitivity stuff was probably going to was causing the issue. But now that reserve licenses, I can pull it. So, this could be all kinds of different things. If you're trying to reserve those simulation licenses, because you only have a few of those for the guys that actually need it, rather than just somebody who checked the box in the add-ins or something, you can do that. You can reserve a certain number per that. You can't see the reserve though. That's the only thing that kind of is a little bit weird here. If I'm just looking at this license manager, it looks like I have one free. And if I launched up and I wasn't in that group, I wouldn't be able to get a license. So it's a little bit misleading. There's no indication here that says you're limited or anything like that, or which licenses are reserved for who. Going back to this file, obviously if this is a group, you would add user 2, user 3, and so on. It's just a space in between each one. So now that this, I'm reserving one license for these 3 people in this group called GoE. So that's pretty much all I got for today. Thank you for attending and have a great rest of your day.